Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, VP of Product for CyberResearch at UpGuard. For years, our team has worked to show how pervasive and dangerous cyber risk is by highlighting cases of data leaks, that is, sensitive information left publicly available on the internet. We've worked on cases involving data from organizations like the NSA, as well as the internal surveillance systems used by the Russian Federation. We found personal information for every registered US voter, and we found the internal software that was part of the Cambridge Analytica case. Today, the stakes of cyber risk are as high as ever. Major nations are increasingly waging a cyber Cold War, and all of their citizens, universities, infrastructure, and companies are caught in the middle. Now, the good news, such as it is that cyber risk is not some immutable fact of life. It's not part of nature. Cyber risk is something that we can study, we can understand its causes, we can manage it, and ultimately, we can reduce it. Today, I'm going to be talking about the cyber research team's analysis of the ASX 200. That is the 200 most valuable companies traded on the Australian Stock Exchange. Doing so, we're looking at two broad classes of data. First are their data leaks. That is, how much information from inside those companies may be inadvertently exposed to the public internet, as well as their security ratings. That is, an objective assessment of their external internet-facing digital assets. So help us understand two broad vectors for data breaches. One of those being data accidentally pushed outside of the perimeter of the company, as well as bad actors trying to break into the perimeter of that company. To analyze the risk of data leaks for the ASX 200, we used proprietary software that we've been working on for years. Essentially, we've built a search engine for data leaks. Like other search engines, it goes out and collects data from its target sources, it indexes it, and then presents it to analysts for use. Now, what makes it different from a Google or Bing or another commercial search engine is that we are interested in finding data leaks rather than in helping you find a good restaurant for tonight. So our search engine prioritizes looking at the deep and dark web rather than content on the open web. And in so doing, helps us find things like confidential business documents and system credentials and personal information. Usually, when we perform data leak assessments, we use many keywords, keywords being the input to the system, the thing you're searching for. Typically, especially for large companies like these, we would use many keywords, probably 25 to 50. For this study, to keep things even, we used one keyword for each company, that being the sort of most obvious one being their name and primary domain, as a way to search for these companies' information and keep the assessment objective and the same for all of them. In doing so, we found data leaks for about 1/3 of the ASX 200. This is actually a very conservative number, as bad as it may sound. We performed similar research for thousands of companies, and our overall rate is finding leaks for about 60% of companies. Now, that being said, this lower rate for the ASX 200 is most likely due to using far fewer keywords than we usually would, especially for companies of this size. At the same time, any data leakage is cause for concern, and certainly knowing that 1/3 of the most valuable companies in Australia are leaking data or have data currently exposed is something to think about. Additionally, we performed the same analysis in 2019. They were not exactly the same companies. The 200 most valuable companies is, of course, a dynamic list, and so it changes over time. But that's what we're going to do is look at the ASX 200 over time. And what we found is a slight increase in the number of companies with active data leaks from 2019 to 2020. That's not really to be a surprising finding. Data leaks are largely a function of the amount of data in the world, the number of people processing data, and the amount of digitization of companies. Now, those are trends that are all only going to increase. And so, while we would certainly prefer to see this problem being resolved, it's not especially surprising to see a modest increase year over year like this. Now, one of the interesting things we were able to see by performing this 2 years in a row is being able to compare the status of data leaks detected in 2019 to where are they today. And this was a surprise. This was a new learning for us. Of those leaks that we detected in 2019, 75% of those were still available on the internet. What this tells us is that companies are essentially not being aware that data leaks are happening and are not taking action as a result. Now, this sort of corroborates a model we've seen in reviewing these daily for all of our customers and for more companies is that data leaks are sort of bimodal. Either they're very short-lived in that the person who exposes the data realizes they made a mistake and tries to fix it as quickly as possible, or they're very long-lived. That person does not realize it, and no one ever goes to find out that the data has been exposed. This leads to the second finding related to this, which is that of those data leaks that had been removed, that we had detected in 2019 and which are no longer available today, 75% of those were ones that we, UpGuard researchers, actually disclosed to the company. So again, this corroborates the general theory that companies simply are not aware they're leaking data. And when they are made aware of it, then they take action pretty quickly. This helps us understand, or it may help inform a finding from the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. They do twice a year reports on notifiable data breaches. And they try to break those down as much as they can to the cause of the data breach. Well, for those involving a cyber incident, that is, those involving some kind of hacking, rather than sort of human error, sending an email to the wrong person, for those involving some kind of cyber incident, about a third of those involved credentials where the source of those credentials was not known. What our research may help suggest is that data leaks can close that gap in explaining where are criminals getting all these credentials that they're using for 1/3 of these cyber incidents. So in both 2019 and in 2020, we've compared the companies for which we found data leaks to their market capitalization to help understand, do these correlate with the size of the company or with other factors. For this, there's a pretty clear linear correlation. As companies get larger, they are more likely to have data leaks. That's not to say that all big companies are leaking data. Again, only 1/3 of the ASX 200 have data leaks that we are talking about in this study. But there's a pretty clear correlation that as companies get bigger, they're more likely to have leaks. That's somewhat confounded by other factors that we've also found that correlate with leaks. Having more employees, simply more people handling data, makes it more likely that someone will make a mistake. Having a more digitized business, that is more data itself, makes it more likely that one asset will be misconfigured. Having a larger digital footprint, more websites, more IP addresses, just makes it more likely that each of those has a potential to leak data. And those are all things that are also tend to correlate with market capitalization. When we look at industry, that also gives us some indication of what are the kinds of companies that are likely to have data leaks. And of course, it can also help us understand what risk do those leaks pose based on the kind of information that those companies are handling. So here we see that financial services companies are the ones where we found the most companies with data leaks. Now that should be normalized somewhat by the number of financial services companies on the ASX 200 at all, because there are quite a few of them up there. When we do that, then we still see that 48% of financial services companies had data leaks, which is above the average of 33%, and also quite concerning. It's also something that makes sense with what we've been talking about as far as the causes of data leakage. That is, these are very large companies. They have a very large number of employees, and they're also ones that have digitized very heavily. So the more we digitize, it makes us, we get great things like mobile banking. It also creates an immense number of touch points for all of the systems and the credentials and the supply chain for all of those digital assets. Finally, aside from companies and maybe their contractors leaking data themselves, there's also this whole other pool of data swashing around that we're able to analyze with our search engine. And there are honestly quite a few of these. There are at any given time over 50,000 databases that are directly accessible and require no authentication to access the data inside them. Now, those are the databases that we are looking at because they require no authentication, and so they are, by any legal standard, publicly exposed data. In doing this, we found, and this is something that we see very broadly, an immense number of business email addresses for people working at the ASX 200 in these publicly exposed databases. If you were to put these all together, then we have found about 18,000 unique email addresses just in 2020 for people working at those companies. Now, obviously, this doesn't take into account their personal email addresses, which are also risk factors and which may also have been exposed, but we have no way to correlate this back to the companies. And what we can see here is that there's an immense world of data for people, maybe they're third parties to those companies, maybe it's a consumer service where the person has signed up with their email, with their business email address. We don't know, but there's an immense world of exposed data linked back to real persons and their business email addresses that's constantly being exposed on the internet. Now, to put this in some perspective, and again to use the numbers from the Office of the Information Commissioner, they found that most notifiable data breaches under their scheme are fairly small. About 80% of the notifiable data breaches affected less than 1,000 people. So if we were to put all of these email addresses into one breach, into one 18,000 person breach, it would be in the 95th percentile of notifiable data breaches that are known to the OAIC, which is, it's pretty significant. These are, of course, being spread out over time, and also something we're not accounting for here are the repeats. These individuals may have been involved in many, many breaches or data exposures during this time period. But again, to try to keep things very conservative in our assessment of the risk, we're only looking at unique email addresses. Thank you for joining me to listen to the Cyber Research team's report on the ASX 200. And I think if there are two takeaways, I think there are two things I would like to leave you with. One of them is that cyber risk is dynamic. It's changing all the time. And to really understand it, these annual snapshots are enough to make us sit up and pay attention, but we need much more granular data and really frequent analyses of the data to be able to understand cyber risk at any point in time, and then also understand how dynamic it is as a whole. The second is that we can't solve problems if we don't know about them. And this is, I think, really the most important thing to take away about data leaks, is that we have found that when companies are aware of it, they take it very seriously. When they are not made aware of it, and currently what we see is that simply they are not being made aware of it, they take no action. And that risk remains latent and may be used however long down the line, or maybe part of a persistent compromise that remains unknown indefinitely. So our goal will continue to be to research those risks so we can all improve together. And yeah, thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again.